chaos is not a good thing. Disorganization isn't a good thing. I don't think there's anything good about what's happening currently. Our industry is going to be out. And when it really hits the fan, it's really, really going to hit the fan. We're going to make it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before people are literally starting to starve to death. And that's what we're looking at. What are we going to do?
Hi guys, welcome back to Yanasa TV. Today I have Shay Myers from Owyhee Produce on the line here. And now I asked Shay to come on here. Some of you may have heard of Shay. He's pretty popular on TikTok, Instagram. He just started a YouTube channel not too long ago. I'll put links to all of his stuff down below. And some of you who watch C-SPAN may have actually seen him testifying before Congress on immigration reform. I asked Shay to come on here today because, like I've said before on some of these interviews, you're not going to agree with all of my guests. I'm not going to agree with all of my guests, but I think that all of these people have some important points to get across, and we should listen to what he has to say because, believe it or not, folks, what Shay is talking about here is an extremely important thing, especially when it comes to our food security in our own country. We are in trouble if something isn't done about this. We're about to lose an entire industry of farmers, agricultural producers, due to this problem. Now, immigration is something that I don't think that there's a fine answer to. It's not. There's no easy answer to it. There's a lot of people will just take a hard line one way or the other without listening to all the facts and considering everything that comes into play here. And so that's what I want Shay to help me do today is to help you think about some of the consequences of what's been going on down at the border, the chaos that's been ensued now for several presidencies, and this goes back quite a ways. And if we don't get it under control soon, we're going to have a big problem. We already have a big problem. We've already lost a ton of produce farmers across the United States. And I'm afraid that if this isn't handled soon, we're going to see a lot more go. So Shay, welcome to the program, and I'm glad to have you on here. You've been, for the past year, you've had a pretty difficult year with your crop production. You had an issue with your onions as far as the herbicides not working, but earlier in the year, you had an issue harvesting your asparagus crops. So what happened with that?
Yeah, so we've had challenges within agriculture. Those that are in your audience that are in ag are going to know that ag has been challenging to get workers in general for probably close to a decade, but it's been very acutely felt over the last 5 years for sure. What's happened is the backup option. So typically what we've done is we've always had a combination of domestic workers, and that when we say domestic, the terminology changes all the time, but I'm talking about families that have been in the area for between 1 and 2 generations. Typically, that's usually who's the domestic workers that'll work in the field, and then the secondary source is an H-2A or an agricultural temporary visa holder that's going to come and work 9 months of the year, and we use some combination of both. But with the job market being what it is, and the circumstance with the financial support that so many have gotten, the domestic workers, the availability or the numbers have dramatically come down, and so there's more pressure on the H-2A program. And the H-2A program is a great program, very expensive, but it's a good program. But if you have any hiccups, it's not like you call a labor contractor or a temp agency and say, hey, I need 20 people tomorrow. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks. And that's what happened with our asparagus crop is we had some minor errors in paperwork that happened, and the delays at the border, where would normally take a week maybe to fix the problem, it took closer to 2 months to get the problem fixed.
You were talking about the finding U.S. workers with the current economic situation, the way people are paid. Do you think that has had an impact in the last couple of years, or do you feel like American workers just haven't wanted that type of work?
Okay, so there's a big difference. When I say domestic workers, I mean, let's be candid. All these guys are Latinos. They're in my area. They're all of Mexican descendants. Those folks are willing to do the work largely. The last time, I mean, There might be some high school kids that'll do some field work off and on, but the labor laws have made that really challenging. So the what I'm going to call an American, and that doesn't mean to do with your race, but it has everything to do with your culture. The more Americanized you are, the less likely you are to work in the fields. It has, and when I grew up and was working on the farm, in the late 90s, there were lots of the work positions that we would fill with high school kids that would go out and work. And that has completely changed. And it's changed because we've made it difficult for employers, for farmers to employ teenage kids because of the labor laws. And it's also a cultural problem in that so many have the attitude or the mentality that they're, I hate to say it, but too good to do the work. It's the same challenge that we have with blue collar jobs here in the United States as well. There's just too many people looking down on those jobs. We valued too much, that college education.
Well, like you said, you're paying what, $21 an hour right now?
So we pay a labor contractor $21 an hour because they're tacking on 35%. But our on-farm minimum wage is $16.44 an hour. Our average pay on farm is nearly $24 an hour.
So it's not like you guys are offering decent pay. It's not like if you're a domestic worker versus an immigrant worker, somebody's going to end up with if anything, the domestic worker ends up being able to keep more of their pay. Versus
the H-2A worker?
Versus the contractor worker where there's a middleman in there.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being the same. I mean, they're different kinds of workers. It's like a temp agency worker. When you think of a labor contractor, it's really like a temp agency. There's higher turnover. Those folks work whenever they want to, and then it's just a different type of worker in general than someone who either comes on an H-2A visa or is a domestic worker with a full-time job. Because you don't have the flexibility. If you work for a temp agency, you can work for 4 days and say, hey, I'm not coming for the next 2 weeks. And the temp agency is like, okay, right? So you just end up with different people for different things.
Can you describe a little more about how this program works with migrant workers? What is, when you are talking about having issues at the border and them coming over, do you think that some of those issues are caused by the congestion that's going on down at the border right now? Or do you think it's more of just a bureaucracy paperwork type scenario?
It's a bureaucratic problem. I mean, I'm sure the numbers at the border are not helping the situation, but it's the disconnect. Like a great example is this. We have several workers who have returned, to work on our farm for multiple years, 5, 6, 7 years. They've already been approved 1 time. They've already been approved 2 times. They've already been approved 3 times. And the 4th or the 5th or the 6th time, when they try and come, something will get flagged within the system that will delay their entry, and everyone just has to wait around. The guy has to sit at the border, pay for a hotel room, or we have to reimburse him for him to sit there for weeks until he can cross and come, even though he's been here 5 times before. And nothing's changed. Nothing's changed about his marital status. Nothing's changed about his education. Nothing's changed, that should flag the system at all. But those types of things, when it happens, are just weeks and weeks of delays. And one worker is not a problem, but when you have a group, a lot of the times these guys are coming in waves. So we bring them, depending on what crop we're harvesting, we'll have an asparagus crew that comes in, and a sweet potato planting crew, and we'll have a onion weeding crew, right? And they're going to come for different things. Well, those denials in some cases come as an entire group. So we don't just not get one person. We don't get the 25 people that are supposed to come. And we don't just not get them for 2 or 3 days. We don't get them for 25 or 30 days. And if you're planning on the people coming, and you've got to harvest a crop, and there's no secondary alternative, which frankly doesn't really exist today. I mean, we're paying labor contractors between $20 and $21 an hour right now, and they still can't come up with the numbers. It's not a function of dollars. And even if it were, there's only so much that we can pay to get people in the fields. And so because the consumer is only willing to pay so much at the end of the day, they're not going to pay $7 a pound for their asparagus. They're either going to buy it from another country where it's cheaper, or they're simply not going to put it on their plate or in their shopping cart in this case.
How much has this impacted, do you think, the agricultural industry over the past several years? I know that you mentioned at one point in time that there was a decline in vegetable production here in the United States. And most of that, from what I understand, has been moving to South America, Central America, away from the United States over the years. Do you think that a lot of that has to do with the labor issues and things that can be solved with the Modernization Act?
it has everything to do with the labor situation. I mean, I tell people that we have 10 years, and I'm not. This isn't like a scare tactic, or I mean, it's a good talking point. But we have 10 years of vegetable production left in the United States. California, California is the canary in the coal mine. California had 28,000 acres of asparagus in production just 15 years ago, and today they have 700. And where is that production shifted to? It's all shifted to Peru and Mexico, because they can't, and it's not the availability of labor, but they simply can't pay the dollars that are needed, that are expected from the state of California, Oregon, and Idaho. It's really not that different anymore. That you can't pay those numbers and grow that crop in the United States. And to think that it's only asparagus, because asparagus is a high labor crop. There's not probably one of the highest labor per pound. I mean, every single little teeny spear has to be picked by hand. But I don't care if it's head lettuce or romaine or onions. We're getting to a point where those of us that grow produce, that grow vegetables and fruits, cannot compete with these other countries. We simply can't compete.
We're losing this part of our industry. We're not, I mean, by not having these migrant workers, by not having immigrants coming into our country and doing these jobs, we're actually losing the entire industry. It's going elsewhere to other countries. So it's not benefiting us by saying, don't come here and work. It's actually hurting us even more.
Well, and it hurts those workers in addition to that, right? Because those workers, if you look at ag laborers in the United States, okay, so these guys, I'm going to use the H-2A workers because it's literally someone from the same country, one who comes to the United States who works for a seasonal job. By the way, these guys will make more than a surgeon in Mexico City will make. So the workers that are coming to my farm are making more than a surgeon in Mexico City. Okay. So that's one thing. But the point of that is that worker is going to come. They're going to make $16 an hour. I'm just going to round. They're going to make $16 an hour. We provide the housing and their transportation to and from Mexico. Okay. They're not paying into Social Security. They're $16.40. It goes in their pocket, right? Or they're $16 an hour. They're keeping all of that. If they do that job, so let's just say that person is a weeder. All they're doing is weeding onion fields. Okay. They come and they work in onion fields for 9 months, just doing weeding labor. If they go to Mexico and do that same job, they're going to make anywhere between 50 cents and $1.50 an hour. Their housing isn't going to be paid for. Their transportation isn't going to be paid for. So they're essentially making somewhere, orders of magnitude, less than what they would make in their home country doing the same job. So the more we put pressure on U.S. growers and say, our U.S. farmers or U.S. businesses in general, hey, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to have the best environmental policy. You have to have the safest food safety standards. You have to have the best worker housing. You have to have you put all these standards in place. You have to have the lowest carbon emissions. Okay. You do all of that, and then we can't compete, and you allow stuff to just continue to filter from our southern border north into the United States. You do exactly what you're not wanting to do. You raise your carbon emissions. You lower the pay for those workers. You worsen the conditions in which those people live, and you accomplish none of the things that you're trying to force to happen in the United States. So I'm totally fine. If you want to do a $15 federal minimum wage, I'm fine with it. If you want to require, for us, for example, we're in the state of Oregon, I've got to do a 401k. It's required. I've got to do paid sick leave. I'm okay with all of those things, but I'm not okay with you requiring me to do that increasing my cost of production. And then you saying, oh no, Shay, I'm not going to buy from you. I have to buy from Mexico. I can't do any of the things you as a voter or as a consumer or however you want to say you're voting, right? Whether it's with your dollar or literally voting your lawmakers into their positions to vote these things into place. You do all of these things and you want to accomplish them. Yet the first thing you do when you go to the grocery store is say, oh, that onion from the USA, it's too expensive. I'm going to buy that one from Mexico. You just force someone to work at such a low amount that they're barely to be able to feed their family, barely, if they can. And that's the decision you made after telling, Shay at Hawaii that he's got to do all of these things and have the highest standards and pay people enough so that they literally make more than a doctor's making in Mexico. But you're not going to support me in that process. That's where I get frustrated. That's what makes me angry. Like I'm okay. Competition's awesome, but not competition where I have to do we spend $250,000 a year just on our food safety program. Now, $250,000 a year just complying with audits. You know what you do in Mexico if you have one of those audits? And the guys in Mexico will be pissed at me saying this, but it's the truth. The auditor shows up, you hand them an envelope and you say bye, and they give you your certificate. There's nothing in place for full accountability because US inspectors don't go there. That does not happen in our country. So you have regulations and processes in place and you say, Shay, you got to do this and I've got to do it. And if I don't do it, I can jail. Never mind the fines. And down there, slip somebody some money. Okay, no problem. And it's done. It's infuriating. And like I said, I'm fine with the competition, but I want fair trade, not free trade. I want fair trade. And if we don't start thinking fair trade instead of just free trade, our industry is going to be out as far as producing vegetables here. And when it really hits the fan, it's really, really going to hit the fan.
Most people would think that the produce, I know a lot of people don't even realize the produce doesn't come from the US. When I ask somebody where they think their produce comes in the dead of winter, you know, they're assuming it's from Florida or something, but nobody ever really checks the label. Some of it's not even labeled. So how do people know how to support US growers?
That's a completely fair question. And it's a complete, absolute failure of our industry. And I mean the entire produce industry in the country. Most should be labeled with produce of USA. That requirement, by the way, was removed, and a backdoor deal. It was called cool country of origin labeling. Ask any U.S. beef producer about that, any rancher, and they'll give you a rant. That was a requirement that any food produced in the United States had to have a label showing that it was produced there. About 4 years ago, the meat packers got together, and with their lobby, they got that removed. So it is no longer a requirement to have country of origin labeling on your food.
So then the consumers basically don't have any idea where their food.
There's no way to know. There's no way to know. And if we were as a produce industry, if we would get our acts together and promote and talk about, I mean, if you want to talk about failures, I've got plenty of my own, but I can sure talk about plenty within the industry. And one of those is that education process. We should be trying to educate the consumer and giving them a path to understand where their food's coming from so that they realize, I mean, every dollar that you spend, you're voting. But if you've got a ballot and all there are is 2 check marks and you don't know whose name is on the other side, you're just guessing. And so I can't blame the consumer fully. Certainly there's plenty of times when the label is there and you know where it's from, but it's not a clear, easy decision. So I think our industry takes the blame. But if you as a consumer want to try and do that, most produce still will have a country of origin label on it, and it will say USA or the state and city that it came from. And you know that you're supporting a US producer in that case.
So what do you think that means for food security in the US if we're depending on all of our vegetables coming from elsewhere?
I think it's an insane idea that we're going to continue to go down this path. I mean, it's scary as an owner, as a farmer, right? To think that you're going to lose everything or that you're going to not grow vegetables anymore. I mean, there's not to say we can't pivot into something, but I sit here every day trying to figure out what that pivot is. And the idea that we are going to allow our food that we consume on a daily basis to be brought in from other countries. The majority of it is just, I don't even know how it's not a significant conversation point, especially when we look back at what happened in the early COVID stages when we couldn't get the antibiotics and other medicines out of China because we had moved all of our manufacturing there. Like, we're talking about the same thing, but you can live without antibiotics. Only a percentage of your population needs those medications. But when it comes to food, we're going to make it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before people are literally starting to starve to death. And that's what we're looking at. So if some policy changed, if there's some conflict at the border, there's another pandemic and the border is fully sealed, what are we going to do?
So tell me about the Farm Workers Modernization Act, which you went to Congress and testified about, and give me an idea of what that entails, what that's going to mean for migrant labor forces if it is passed in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big ask to get it to pass right now, even with the Democrats in control. It's always, I'll answer this question, but I'm going to be a little long-winded because the folks that like to come at me or at anyone else and blame one party or another, there's no single party that takes blame here, because the Republicans had control. They had a president that was in favor of it. Bush W was in favor of passing it, and he couldn't get it done with full Republican support. The Democrats are in the same situation with full Democratic support and control, and they're probably not going to get it done. It's this. I don't want to call it even a hot topic. I guess apparently it is. As someone who works around these Latino workers all the time, someone who really appreciates the culture and understands what they've gone through, it's infuriating to me. But if I'm ever going to do anything and scream at the radio, it's me listening to, frankly, conservative talk radio talk about not today, because the environment's a little bit different, but 2-3 years ago, when you heard seal the border, nobody should come, all these people should be deported. If you want to see me get red faced and just start screaming at, my radio, that's the circumstance where I'm going to do it, because it's a true lack of understanding. And it's people that I usually can relate to. So the Farm Worker Modernization Act, to get to that, it relates to really kind of several different workers. You've got DACA, the dreamers. Those are the kids that were brought here at a young age by their parents. They had to be under 12 years of age and brought in the United States. I don't know where the argument is there. That's those kids went to high school. Some of them went to college. They're just stuck in limbo, and I don't know why we can't help them regardless. But then you have workers, people who have crossed. Most of the workers are aging out. They're really getting pretty old. There hasn't, until recently, there were not. It was very, very, very difficult to cross the border. In the Obama administration, it was some of the hardest, actually. So just, because it's always these party lines, this crap about party lines. It wasn't. It was very difficult. It was just as difficult to cross in the Obama administration as it was during the Trump administration. It may be harder, but they both did a really good job of border security for the most part. Previous to Obama, though, you could come across. So you're talking, 10, 15 years ago is the most recent. Those folks, as part of this bill, would have a path to gaining a green card to be able to work, and then a fine to pay to be able to become a U.S. citizen. Over the course of about 6 to 10 years, if the bill were to pass.
You were talking about, the party lines and how conservatives think one way or the left thinks one way. And I agree with you. I think immigration in general as an overall picture is a very difficult subject because there are so many different angles to it. What I like about some of the things that you've been talking about when it comes to the migrant workers and our needs for our food supply, it opens the door for people to understand that there's more to it than just people coming over the border. We depend on these workers to be able to grow our food and operate farms, nobody else is willing to do the work. So it's nothing new. It's nothing one of those things where you kind of have to open your eyes up and say, okay, well, this is what we're dealing with. Do we want to starve to death? Do we want food insecurity? Or do we want to accept that we need to make some of these things? And the other thing is that everybody here came from a family that migrated to the United States at some point in time. So I think that overall, the overall topic can be a very difficult topic to weed through. I don't think that people should look at it from a definitive standpoint just because that's what their party thinks. But them working for about 6 to 10 years to get permanent citizenship. Now, some of the criticism that I've heard about this bill is that it could set up some farmers and workers into an indentured servitude type situation where the farmer is in complete control over them because they're trying to get citizenship. What are your thoughts on that?
They don't have to stay in agriculture. They have to have a certain amount of time in which they worked in agriculture. So actually agriculture is worried about the opposite. Okay, so you worked for me for 3 years, you qualified, and you had to have done that prior to, right? So this is not from here forward, it's in the past. So you had to have worked in agriculture in the last, I don't know what they were using, 5 to 6 years. You had to have worked in agriculture for 3 years out of that, okay? But the concern in agriculture within those the critics on the right side, I guess you would say, or those within specifically ag, is that now I'm going to give you a path to citizenship, and now you're going to stop working on the farm because there is nothing that ties them to the farm. Once they get their permit, they don't have to stay working in agriculture at all. They've got the permit. They're legal to work here. They can change industries, and that is actually a danger that we run. So. What you're saying is actually really not of concern, But I mean, and I frankly, for agriculture, I don't think it is of concern either. I mean, most of the people working in ag are doing it because that's where they want to be to some extent, right? The lifestyle, I don't mean the workload, but the lifestyle, the ability to get 2 or 3 months off in the winter, that kind of thing. And if we're treating people right, then they should stay. If we're not, then, go do something else. I mean, I'm not, it's not about tying people to anything in particular. It's about treating people in such a way that they want to do what they're doing and they're respected for what they're doing. If anyone is leaving farm labor, it's because people think poorly of them. They think that they're unskilled, that they're not doing a job of value. And that's why they leave. It has nothing to do, has very little to do with what they're earning and the work in particular that they're doing. It's the criticism that they get.
When you look at a lot of migrant workers, some of them migrate just for the seasons of work and then go back because there's not other opportunities there for them. Are there ways that we can create more opportunities for agricultural laborers during off seasons to help stabilize their life a little bit?
What we can with the support of consumers and the government. I mean, if we're going to decide that our food security is important, then we can. I mean, in our area, first of all, we have virtually zero migrant workers. The people that the workforce that we have, there's a reason we call them domestic workers. They don't migrate anymore. If you want to consider migrant workers, really, that's the H-2A workers. Those are the people that are actually coming directly from Mexico. Very, very, very little migrant labor happens anywhere in the Northwest. Or anywhere in California. There is a little bit of south to north, north to south movement in California because of the significant operations that are there. But for the most part, people live in the same home all year long. Number one. Number two, there's enough vertical integration in operations anymore. Like if you work for us in the fields in the summer, we're going to put you in the packing shed, or you have an opportunity to work in the packing shed during the winter, during the off season, whether it's, in our case for onions, you're going to come from the field and come into the packing shed. But we really don't have a problem with that. And there's really not that many people that cross over. Some do, but there's just enough opportunities that, a lot of people will work their 9 months and they won't work the other thing. And that comes back to, I mean, I'm going to digress here for just a second, but the ag overtime issues. There's a lot of people talking about how we have to have ag overtime and everything. Well, if you're going to work, full-time is 2,080 hours a year. I think most of us, a lot of us, if we could work 3,000 hours or that same 2,000 hours, I'll just use that number. If we could work our same 2,080 hours in 9 months and then take 3 months off, we'd be okay with that. And that's what a lot of these people choose to do. They will work very hard for 9 months and then they'll take 3 months off at their choosing. They can all go get a job tomorrow if they want to, but the vast majority of them are not going to do that. They're going to relax. They're going to enjoy the winter. They're going to enjoy 2 or 3 months of not showing up for work. And then when, February, March rolls around, they're going to go back to work again.
When they're taking time off, are they taking unemployment benefits, or are they're living off of the money that they've earned? It's just like a teacher would work. They work during the school year. They have 3 months off.
Yeah. The difference with the teacher is, of course, and I've kind of thought through this process for this specific argument. I mean, the teacher still gets their pay, right? They're going to get paid. They don't have to be disciplined enough to squirrel away their savings so that they're covered over those 3 months of the summer when they're not working. That's the difference. Is those workers are still going to earn what they're earning in that 9 months, and they have to be disciplined enough to save it. They can also, unemployment is an option. Some will do that. Some will go get a job, and some will do neither. It really depends on the person. I mean, I think as there has been less and less stigma behind the idea of unemployment, more people have gone to get unemployment. But I couldn't speak statistically about, what individuals are doing, not with any authority anyway. On the Farm Worker Modernization Act, I mean, you touched on this before. I'm not sure how we've all separated ourselves from the fact that our families all came here before us, our ancestors. And they likely weren't business owners in the first generation. They likely were working for other people doing difficult jobs. The beauty of this country, the beauty of being an immigrant to the United States, and one of the reasons that it pulls people here is that you can come, you can find a job, you can earn a living, and your kid, as an immigrant, and the person who's been here for 3 generations can go to college together. And we need to realize this as Americans, that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. We don't have a class system. We don't have a caste system. We don't have any of those things. I can, I'll get the whole, white privilege thing, argument on the opposite side of this. And I get that. I mean, I have been very blessed to be here and to have the opportunities that I have, but I have literally seen my kids go to the same elementary school, and they will go to the same colleges with the folks that are working right outside of my office. And I look forward to that. I have workers that I went to high school with that were first generation, that are college graduates that I work side by side with today as well. What happened, when I was a kid, and what will happen when my kids are in college is the same thing. We live in such a beautiful place that gives us that opportunity. It doesn't mean that it's easy, and I don't want to pretend that it's easy to work in the fields every day, but we don't have to do that and expect our kids to do that and our grandkids to do that. We only have to, we're building a legacy, an opportunity, or immigrants have the opportunity. My grandparents or my great grandparents or my great great grandparents had that same opportunity. They came and they worked for other people. They built that nest egg and opportunity for their kids to go study and to improve and to, stand on their shoulders. And the same thing happens today, regardless of where you're from, if you're willing to work.
Now, with that, do you think that we should just open our borders, or do you think that it still needs to be a controlled process?
No open borders. I mean, the process needs to be organized, and because that's going to ruin all kinds of things as well. Chaos is not a good thing. Disorganization isn't a good thing. Not knowing who's here is not a good thing. I mean, I don't think there's anything good about what's happening currently. I would say that the process has been potentially too difficult, right? We make it harder to come here than it needs to be. And our economy is built on, and people forget this. It's not just ag economy that's built on people who are willing to migrate to the United States. All aspects of the economy, or no, not all, many aspects of the US economy are based on migrant labor. People who are going to come and do a difficult job for fair pay so that they can create a future for them and their posterity.
All right. Well, Shay, I think you've answered most of my questions, and hopefully, people understand where a farmer is coming from, a farmer's perspective on the current labor force situation, as well as, some of the other issues we talked about. The main thing here is that we're losing an entire industry. People look out at, a lot of farmlands. They see a lot of corn. They see a lot of things growing, but they don't realize is how much produce we're not producing anymore, because it's all going elsewhere. And the amount of effort that goes into that, and just the fact that, we're getting priced out of the equation on a yearly basis, daily basis. So hopefully people will listen to, what you said today. And
I hope so. I mean, I try and be obviously I'm very passionate about what I do, and I feel uniquely qualified in my position and education and experience to talk about the policies and how they're affecting agriculture and the people, the migrant workers that I've been around, that I grew up with. But I don't want to be wrong. And I'm open to, certainly there have been people that have called me out on social media and other locations where they're like, hey, you're not right on this. And if I'm not right, I need to admit that. And I think that's what's missing today. I mean, I think that's what we need to have. We left and right need to be talking to each other. We're not that different from each other. We just sometimes misread what we think the other person's belief is about policy or politics or circumstances.